Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. We're now aiming for 2,000, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. After our lavish wedding, my wife refused intimacy for 3 days, so I filed for an annulment. When I confronted her, she said, "It'll only be on my terms. Take it or leave it." So, I took everything away from her and walked out. I've never been the type to back down from a fight, but that night, just 3 days before I filed for the annulment, Clarissa made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. The honeymoon suite was supposed to be our celebration. Champagne on ice, silk sheets, the works. I had spent months planning it, just like I had spent months building her a life she didn't deserve. A car, clothes, a house for her parents, all given to her like I was a lovesick fool. And I was, until she spoke. We'd barely kicked off our shoes when it happened. The wedding had been perfect, 300 guests, her dress a cascade of white that cost more than my first car, my vows so earnest they made her mother cry. I carried her over the threshold, laughing, my tie already loose. I leaned in to kiss her, expecting the heat we'd flirted with for months. Instead, she placed a hand on my chest, firm like a bouncer guarding a club I wasn't cool enough to enter. "Not tonight," she said, her voice low, eyes steady. "Not ever, unless it's on my terms. Take it or leave it." I froze, lips still puckered like an idiot. "What? You heard me, Evan." She stepped back, arms crossed, a smirk twisting her face. The same smirk I once found charming now felt like a blade in my gut. "I decide. Not you." The room tilted. I'd spent 6 months chasing her Clarissa, the artist with the wild laugh and sharp edges, the woman who made me feel alive after years of drafting blueprints and shaking hands. I gave her everything, not because she asked, but because I wanted to. The car, a cherry red convertible she'd squealed over. The wardrobe, racks of designer clothes she paraded in front of me. The house, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper for her parents, Loren and Franco, who were drowning in rent hikes. I handed her the keys 2 weeks before the wedding, grinning like a sap as they hugged me. "And now this. Terms?" I asked, my voice tight, fists clenched. She shrugged, casual, like she was picking a restaurant. "I don't owe you anything. You gave me those things. I didn't beg. If you want me, it's when I say yes. Not a second sooner." I stared at her, the woman I'd married 12 hours ago, and saw a stranger. Not the Clarissa who danced with me at that gallery opening, her paint-stained fingers brushing my sleeve. Not the Clarissa who whispered she loved me under a streetlight. This was someone else. Cold. Calculated. Playing a game I hadn't agreed to. My hands trembled. I could have yelled, begged, demanded answers. Instead, I grabbed my jacket. "Where are you going?" she called as I reached the door. "Leaving," I said, without looking back. The elevator ride down was a blur. My phone buzzed. Marco, my best friend, the lawyer who warned me I was moving too fast with her. "How's the bride?" His text read. I didn't answer. I stumbled into the hotel bar, ordered a whiskey, and let it burn down my throat. The bartender, a guy with a gray beard and tired eyes, slid me another drink without asking. "Rough night," he said. I nodded, staring at the glass. Rough didn't begin to cover it. Her words, "take it or leave it," played on a loop, sinking deeper with every repetition. I built my life on control. Every blueprint I designed, every beam I placed was precise. I didn't bend for clients or compromise for contractors. And yet, here I was, breaking myself for a woman who'd just kicked me in the teeth. The house for her parents? 2 months of paperwork and my savings gutted. The car? Her joyride while I took the bus. The wedding? My credit card still smoldering. And for what? To be told I'd only get scraps when she felt like it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marco. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Evan, it's midnight. You okay?" "No," I said, my jaw tight. "I'm done." She said it's her terms or nothing. I'm picking nothing. Silence. Then a low whistle. "You sure? You just tied the knot." "I'm sure. I want an annulment. Tomorrow." "Jesus, man. That's nuclear. What about all the stuff you gave her?" "The house." I downed the whiskey, feeling the answer harden like steel in my spine. "I'm taking it all back. Every damn thing. She can figure out her terms without me." Marco sighed, the sound of a man who'd seen me like this before. "You're pissed. Sleep on it. Call me in the morning." "I will," I said, but I already knew sleep wouldn't change a thing. I hung up, paid the tab, and stepped into the night, my breath sharp and cold in my chest. The suite upstairs was hers now. Let her enjoy it. I checked into a cheap room across the street, the kind with thin walls and a flickering TV. Lying on the lumpy bed, I stared at the ceiling, her smirk etched into my mind. She thought she'd won, that she'd set the rules and kept me on a leash. She was wrong. By morning, I'd have a plan. By tomorrow, I'd have my life back. And Clarissa? She'd learn what leaving it really meant. I woke up the next morning with a headache and a mission. The hotel room's thin curtains let in a dull, gray light, but I didn't need sunshine to see what I had to do. Clarissa's words, "take it or leave it," had looped in my head all night, each replay stoking the fire in my chest. I'd given her everything, built her a pedestal she didn't deserve, and she'd kicked it over like it was nothing. Fine. If she wanted terms, I'd set some of my own. I showered quickly, the water lukewarm, and called Marco from the lobby. This time, he sounded more awake, but his tone was cautious. "You still on this annulment train?" he asked. "Full speed," I said, pacing past a guy mopping the floor. "And I'm taking back what's mine. Starting with the house. The one for her parents?" Marco's voice tightened. "Evan, that's a gut punch. You sure? They're not my family. She's not my wife." "I'm sure." He sighed, the sound of a man who knew better than to argue with me when I was like this. "All right, I'll draft the annulment papers. The house, you're still on the deed, right?" "Damn right I am." I was smart enough not to transfer it yet. 2 months of renovations, my signature on every line. "Get me an eviction notice." "Today." "Done," Marco said. "But this is going to get messy. She'll fight back." "Let her," I said and hung up. By noon, I was at my office, a glass-walled space downtown, where I turned sketches into structures. My assistant, Jin, raised an eyebrow as I walked in, time missing, shirt wrinkled. "Rough honeymoon?" she asked. "Over already," I replied, brushing past her to my desk. I pulled up the house file, every receipt, every payment. All mine. I bought that house for Loren and Franco, Clarissa's parents, because they were drowning in debt. Their old place, a shoebox with a leaking roof. I'd fixed it up, handed them the keys, watched their faces light up. That memory stung now, but not enough to stop me. Marco texted me the eviction notice by 2. I printed it, drove to the house, a tidy 2-bedroom with fresh paint and a new porch I built myself. Loren answered the door, her gray hair in a messy bun, eyes widening when she saw me. "Evan, what's wrong?" "Everything," I said, handing her the paper. "You've got 3 days to get out. I'm selling it." She blinked, confusion creasing her face. "Selling? But this is our home. You gave it to us." "I gave it to Clarissa," I corrected, my voice cold. And she threw it back in my face. "Ask her why." Franco lumbered up behind her, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. "What's this about?" he growled, snatching the notice from Lauren's hands. He skimmed it, his jaw tightening. "You're kicking us out? After all that talk about family? You're her family, not mine." I met his glare. 3 days. I turned and walked back to my car, their protests fading behind me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but I didn't look back. Next stop was the dealership. Clarissa's car, that red convertible she drove like she owned the world, was still in my name. I'd paid cash for it, a reckless gift after she'd batted her eyes at it. The manager didn't blink when I handed over the title. "Selling it," I said. "Now." 2 hours later, it was gone. A check sat in my pocket, but I didn't feel triumph. Just a cold, steady purpose. The clothes were last. I'd filled her closet with things she'd modeled for me: dresses, jackets, boots. All of it top shelf. I went to our apartment, her keys still on my ring, and found it empty. She hadn't come back. Good. I boxed it all up, silk, leather, denim, and drove to a shelter downtown. The woman at the desk smiled as I dropped it off. "This will help a lot of people." I nodded, but didn't say a word. Back at the office, I checked my phone. Clarissa had posted something, her first move. "Some men think they own you with a deed," it read, with a photo of her smirking, paintbrush in hand. My blood boiled. She thought this was a game, a story she could spin. I texted Marco. "How's the annulment?" "Filed," he replied. "She'll be served tomorrow." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The house, the car, the clothes. Gone. I'd stripped her pedestal bare, and it felt right. But I wasn't done. That night, I crashed at Marco's place, his spare room cluttered with law books and takeout boxes. He handed me a beer, eyeing me like I was a bomb about to go off. "You're really doing this?" he asked. "Every step," I said, popping the cap. "She wanted terms? She's got them. She's going to hit back. You know Clarissa's not the type to roll over." I took a long swig, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. "She can try. I've got nothing left to lose." He shook his head, but I caught the flicker of respect in his eyes. I'd drawn a line, and I wasn't crossing it. Clarissa thought she set the rules that night, but I was rewriting them. By the time I was through, she'd understand what leaving it really cost her. And her parents? They'd understand, too. A week after I torched Clarissa's world, I found myself standing in the shadow of her triumph. She'd turned my wreckage into her spotlight. An art exhibit called Terms of Endearment, built from the ashes of everything I'd given her. I heard about it from Marco, who forwarded me a link to her post. "Opening tonight. See what happens when you try to buy me." The photo showed her smirking, holding a jagged sculpture made of car parts and shredded fabric. My car. My gifts. My humiliation. twisted into her art. I had to see it. I spent that day in my office, sketching a new house. A stark, minimalist box with clean lines and no room for anyone but me. It was my reset. My way of clawing back control after Clarissa's stunt on our wedding night. I'd already taken the house from her parents, sold her car, dumped her clothes. The annulment was filed, papers served. I should have been done. But that post gnawed at me. She was spinning this like I was the villain, and people were eating it up, comments praising her strength, her rebellion. I couldn't let it stand. That night, I pulled on a hoodie and drove to the gallery downtown. It was packed hipsters in black turtlenecks, critics scribbling in notebooks. Clarissa's voice cut through the hum. I slipped in, hood up, staying near the back. The room was dim, spotlights illuminating her sculptures. A mangled fender from her convertible, wires curled like veins. A dress I bought her, sliced and pinned to a frame like a butterfly. Each piece screamed defiance, and the crowd lapped it up, murmuring about power and ownership. Then she stepped up, paint-stained jeans, and that same smirk, a mic in her hand. "This is about taking back what's mine," she said, voice steady. "Some people think a gift comes with a leash." I cut mine off. Applause rippled through the room. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. But then she kept going, and something shifted. "I learned the hard way," she said, her voice quieter now. "A man once held me down. Literally. Until I couldn't breathe. I swore I'd never let it happen again." My stomach twisted. She'd never told me that. 6 months of dating, a wedding, and she'd never mentioned an ex, let alone one who'd hurt her. Was that why she'd pulled the terms card? Fear. I shook it off. It didn't change what she'd done, humiliating me, using me. The crowd clapped again, louder this time, and I saw red. She was winning, turning my life into her sob story. The event dragged on, people snapping photos and sipping wine, but I waited. When the crowd thinned out, I found her by a sculpture, alone, adjusting a light. I stepped up, keeping my voice low. "Nice show, Clarissa." She spun around, eyes narrowing before recognition hit. "Evan, what? Here to take this, too?" "Thought I'd see what you made of my stuff," I said, nodding at the twisted fender. "You're good at breaking things." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're one to talk. Evicting my parents? Selling my car? Real classy. You set the rules," I shot back. "I left it, like you said. Now you're crying about it?" Her smirk faded, replaced by something harder. "You think this is about crying? You think I'd beg you? I'd rather be alone than owned." "Owned." I stepped closer, voice rising. "I gave you everything because I loved you, not to own you. You threw it all in my face." "Why?" She froze for a second, then looked away. "You wouldn't get it." "Try me," I said, my pulse pounding. "What's this really about? That ex you mentioned? Or just you being a control freak?" Her eyes snapped back to mine, blazing. "You don't get to dig into my past. You don't get anything from me anymore. Then why put it out there?" I gestured at the room around us. "You're using it to play the victim. I deserve to know why I'm the bad guy." "You're not," she said, her voice dropping. "You're just collateral. I needed to breathe, Evan. You were suffocating me." "Suffocating?" I barked a laugh. "I built you a life. You didn't even say thank you." "I didn't ask for it," she snapped, stepping into my space. "You decided what I needed. You didn't ask me." We stood there, inches apart, the air thick with everything we'd left unsaid. I wanted to shake her, to make her see how deeply she'd gutted me. But her words kept echoing. "You didn't ask me. Had I missed something? Pushed too hard?" "No." She still chose to blindside me, turning our marriage into a power play. "You're right," I said finally, stepping back. "I didn't ask, but I'm done guessing. Enjoy your exhibit." I turned and walked out, her silence trailing behind me. Outside, I yanked off my hood, sucking in air. She'd cracked open a piece of her past, some guy who'd hurt her, but that wasn't an excuse. It was a shield, and she'd wielded it against me. I got in my car, my hand steady now. She thought she'd won, framing me as the leash holder. But I saw her art for what it truly was, a cage she'd built herself. Driving back to Marco's, her words played over and over. Collateral. Maybe I was. But I wasn't done. The annulment was next, and I'd make sure she felt every inch of what she'd started. She wanted to breathe? I'd take the air out of her story. 2 weeks after Clarissa's exhibit, I stood in a courtroom, ready to end what never should have started. The annulment hearing was my finish line, my chance to bury the mess she'd made of me. I'd spent those weeks pouring myself into my new house, design a lean, solitary box that sold to a tech guy for a fat check. The profit sat untouched in my account while Clarissa's world unraveled. I'd taken her parents' house, her car, her clothes. She fought back with her art, painting me as the villain, but today, I'd have the last word. The courtroom was sterile, benches lined up, a judge with a bored stare, Marco at my side in a crisp suit. I'd shaved, put on a tie, looked the part of a man in control. Clarissa walked in late, paint still on her knuckles, her lawyer trailing behind like a nervous dog. She didn't look at me, just sat across the aisle, chin up like she still held the cards. I almost laughed. She had nothing left to play. Marco had warned me she'd countersue emotional distress, some nonsense about the gifts being hers by right. But I'd kept the receipts, the titles, the proof. The house was mine on paper. The car never transferred. The clothes were donated gone. Her exhibit might have won her fans, but it wouldn't win her this. The judge flipped through papers, voice flat. Mr. Gray, you're seeking an annulment on grounds of non-consummation and irreconcilable differences, correct? Yes, Your Honor, I said, voice steady. She refused intimacy on our wedding night, said it would only happen on her terms. I left. Clarissa's lawyer, a wiry guy with glasses, jumped in. Your Honor, my client contends this was a misunderstanding. Mr. Gray overreacted and then retaliated by seizing property and gifts promised to her and her family. Promised, not given, Marco cut in, sliding documents across the table. The house remains in Evan's name. The car, too. No legal transfer occurred. As for the clothes, they were donated. She has no claim. The judge nodded, scribbling something down. Clarissa shifted, her jaw tight. I caught her eye for a split second, still defiant, but flickering. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispered something, then stood. Your Honor, may I speak? She asked. Go ahead, the judge said, barely looking up. She faced me, her voice low but clear. Evan, I'll drop the countersuit. Just give me something. Help my parents. They're in a hole because of this. I stared at her, the woman who'd smirked at me on our wedding night, who'd twisted my gifts into her art show. Now she was begging. After Loren and Franco were evicted, I'd heard through Marco they'd moved into a cheap, cramped apartment a far cry from the house I'd fixed up. I'd felt a twinge then, but it passed. They weren't my problem. No, I said, loud enough for the whole room. You set the rules, Clarissa. You told me to leave it. I did. Figure it out. Her lawyer flinched, but she didn't. She sat back down, hands clenched like she'd expected it. The judge moved fast after that. Granted the annulment. Dismissed her claims. Banged the gavel. Done. Marco clapped my shoulder as we walked out. Clean break, he said. You're free. Felt free the second I left that suite, I said. But my chest was tight, not from regret, but from the weight of everything I'd dismantled. I drove to Marco's, replaying her plea in my mind, help her parents. Part of me wanted to. Lauren's quiet thank yous when I handed them the keys still echoed. But Clarissa had burned that bridge, not me. I crashed on Marco's couch, scrolling my phone, trying to feel like I'd won. A notification popped up, her latest post. No words, just a photo of one of her sculptures, a twisted mess of wire and cloth, captioned with a single period. I shut it off. She could spin it however she wanted. I was out. The next day, I got the call. Marco's voice was tense. Clarissa's parents are on her case, big time. Loren called her last night, screaming. From what I heard. How do you know that? I asked, sitting up. Her lawyer's buddy blabbed. Said Loren laid into her. We had a chance, and you ruined it. Franco's not even talking to her. They're blaming her for the apartment, the eviction, all of it. I leaned back, letting it sink in. Good. She should feel it. She does, Marco said. Her lawyer's scrambling, but she's got no money. That exhibit's not selling like she thought. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Clarissa had played her hand defiance, art, control, and it had folded. Her parents turning on her was a twist I hadn't planned, but it fit. They'd once hugged me, called me a blessing. Now I was their curse, and she was the reason. That night, I packed my stuff at Marco's, ready to move into my new place the next day. The check from the house sale was cashed. My life streamlined, no Clarissa, no baggage. I thought about her plea again, her parents' anger. It didn't soften me. She'd wanted terms, and I'd given her mine. If Loren and Franco were tearing into her, that was her mess to clean up. As I zipped my bag, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You win. No name, but I knew. I didn't reply. Winning didn't feel like I'd imagined. It was quieter, colder, but it was mine. She'd have to learn to live with hers. A month after the annulment, I moved into my new house, a sharp-edged box of glass and steel built for one. I'd sold the design that got me there, pocketed the cash, and stripped my life down to what I could carry. No more gifts. No more bending. The place was quiet that first night. Just me and a sketch pad on a folding table, lines of a community center taking shape under my pencil. I'd won. Cut Clarissa out like a bad beam. But the silence wasn't triumph, it was something else. Clean. Hard-earned. Mine. I'd heard bits about her since the hearing. Marco kept tabs, feeding me scraps. Her exhibit had stalled. Pieces sitting unsold. Her big moment fizzling out. Her parents, Loren and Franco, had turned on her. Their blame a hammer she couldn't dodge. I didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. The text she'd sent you when sat unanswered in my phone. A period on her story I didn't care to reopen. I was done. That first week in the house, I kept busy unpacking, sketching, meeting a client who wanted a minimalist office. The work steadied me, each line on paper a step further away from her. I'd see her face sometimes, that smirk from our wedding night. But it didn't sting anymore. It was just a memory, like a blueprint I'd scrapped. Marco came by one night, beer in hand, grinning at the bare walls. "You're a monk now, huh?" he said. "Something like that," I replied, clinking his bottle. "No room for clutter." "Or ex-wives," he added. I laughed. For the first time in weeks. He didn't mention her again. Didn't need to. I was free, and it felt right. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. I was half asleep, pencil still in hand when I saw it, an unknown number, but the message hit like a brick. "Don't call until you fix this." No name. No context. But I knew Franco. Her father. I'd met him enough times. Gruff, broad-shouldered. The kind of man who'd shaken my hand like I was gold when I handed them that house. Now he was texting me? No. I checked the thread. Wrong number, he admitted. It was meant for Clarissa, not me. I set the phone down, heart thudding. Fix what? The house. Their lives? Her mess? I didn't text back. Didn't need to. It wasn't my fight. But the blunt edge of his words stuck with me. The next day, Marco confirmed it over coffee. Her parents are done with her, he said, stirring sugar into his cup. Lauren's been calling her nonstop, guilt trips, tears. Franco's worse. Won't even pick up her calls. They're stuck in that crappy apartment, blaming her for every leak and creak. She earned it, I said, voice flat. She picked her terms. She did, he agreed. But it's hitting her hard. Lawyer friend says she's barely leaving her studio. Exhibit's dead. Collectors moved on. I nodded, sipping my coffee. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd swung at me, missed, and now her own people were landing the blows. Good. Let her feel it. I'd felt at first her cold hand on my chest, her rules shutting me out. She'd built her cage, not me. That night, I finished the community center sketch pro bono. Something to give back without strings. It was late, past midnight, when I stepped outside, the air cool against my skin. The house stood solid around me, a fortress I'd built. I thought about Clarissa then, not with anger, but with distance. She'd texted me once, admitted defeat. I hadn't replied because I didn't need to. She'd lost more than I'd ever taken: her art, her family, her grip. I'd only lost a wife I never truly had. And I'd gained this a life on my terms. The next morning, Marco called, his voice low. "You hear about Clarissa?" "No," I said, setting my pencil down. "What now?" "She smashed one of her sculptures. Neighbors saw it. Hammer, middle of the night. Said she was crying, muttering something about terms." I leaned back, picturing it. Clarissa in that dim studio, paint on her hands, swinging at her own work. Not defiance this time, despair. Her parents? I asked. "Still on her case," Marco said. "Loren told her last week they had a chance at something stable, and she blew it. Franco's holding the line. Won't talk until she gets them a roof." I didn't say anything for a minute. Just let it sink in. She built her exhibit to prove she didn't need me, to turn my gifts into her rebellion. Now it was dust, and her family was the weight crushing her. I remembered Lauren's face, soft, grateful once, now twisted with blame. Franco's silence, louder than words. Clarissa alone, hammer in hand, destroying what she'd made. "She's done," I said finally. "Looks like it," Marco replied. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. The moment I hung up, I picked up my pencil and started a new sketch. The lines flowed clean, precise, mine. Clarissa's regret wasn't my burden. She'd set her terms and cost herself everything: her parents' trust, her art's shine, her control. I'd reclaimed what was mine and built something new. I didn't think about her much after that. The house stayed quiet. The work kept coming. And I slept just fine. She'd wanted to breathe, to cut the leash. She had right into a void. Me? I was standing tall, sketching a future she'd never touch. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.